The Kremlin is focused on planning to achieve a final victory in Ukraine by the end of this summer. Russian generals are dreaming of a fierce offensive during their meetings over the map. The plan is quite simple on paper: to rapidly breach the southern front lines and at the same time lock down the eastern fronts with an iron curtain. Behind this overconfidence lies a massive military force amassed on the plains of Zaporizhia. Because Russia has centered the 58th Combined Arms Army, the region's most elite force, entirely for this offensive. The 42nd Guards Motor Rifle Division, equipped with massive Soviet-era arsenals, has been armed to the teeth. Also, the elite VDV airborne troops, considered the pride of the Russian army, are awaiting orders for the attack. The 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, redeployed from Crimea, and the ruthless Storm Z penal battalions have been pushed to the very front of the front line. In other words, the Russian staff officers believed they had created an invincible war machine and that the wind was at their backs. However, the most critical breaking point arrived, just as the Kremlin's expectations reached their peak. Ukraine made that historic move that would shake the entire course of the war and plunge the Russian army into a deep silence. Recently, a total of 590 kilometers of homeland territory was liberated from occupation. But the Ukrainian armed forces, with a planned and lethal blow, President Zelensky officially confirmed this victory that astonished the entire world.
590 кілометрів нашої території звільнено і під контролем. Тенденція точно не...
Exactly, 590 kilometers. This figure is not just a piece of land changing hands on a map, it is a significant countermove that has shaken Russia's planned summer offensive. This shockwave, which started in the endless fields of Zaporizhia, extended to the coal-black towns of Donetsk. Striking and devastating surprises occurred one after another in the most challenging terrains of the Kharkiv and Sumy fronts, those massive trench networks, which Russian commanders had boasted for months as the world's most impenetrable defense, collapsed like a house of cards. Billions of dollars worth of armored munitions, massive logistic stockpiles, and tens of thousands of soldiers crammed into trenches proved completely useless. Putin's staff officers could not make even an inch of strategic progress after all that preparation. So, exactly how did Ukraine reclaim this critical 590-kilometer area that has the potential to change the fate of the war? Of course, thwarting the Russians' 6-month occupation efforts and Putin's long-term plans was not easy. Every stage of the counterattack wave stretching from the Donbass to southern Ukraine proceeded methodically. The Zaporizhia front stands out as one of the most important fronts in Ukraine's liberation operations. This is the most ruthless and decisive chessboard of the war, because Zaporizhia is a massive lethal arena where both sides have deployed their most elite troops and heaviest weapons. The secret to Kyiv's great success lay not only in courage but in the lessons learned from bitter past experiences. The strategic intelligence of the Ukrainian army was no longer repeating those critical mistakes of the massive armored offensives carried out in 2023. It had been bitterly learned that advancing in crowded tank convoys in open terrain, right through the middle of massive minefields, was suicide. Instead, a completely new, rational, flexible, and almost surgical warfare doctrine was integrated into the front line. The main goal was to dismantle the spiraling Russian defense lines, not by smashing into walls with brute force, but by infiltrating weak points with intelligence. In this context, the heart of the operations was beating in the dusty, heavily mined, and extremely dangerous lands of Zaporizhia. One of the most striking reflections of this new and deadly strategy on the ground revealed itself with that sudden blow, delivered to the Russian lines on the Huliai-Poli axis, when the dates showed May 20th to 23rd. 26. The village of Zalisia, just west of Huliai-Poli, was targeted. The leading actors on the stage of the war were the legendary 118th Mechanized Brigade and the 65th Mechanized Brigade, supporting them from the flank. Zalisia was not an ordinary village, but a highly critical node, woven with trench networks that enabled the Russians to spread westward. For this reason, the soldiers of the 118th and 65th Brigades applied night infiltration tactics much more carefully, and almost flawlessly this time. Instead of risking heavy armor, a hunter fleet of night vision FPV drones was unleashed on the region. These drones tracked down the logistics trucks, carrying ammunition from the Russian rear to the front line, one by one on the roads, and blew them up. Completely deprived of logistics and out of ammunition, the Russian front line was isolated from within. Ukrainian infantry launched a lightning-fast raid on the northern part of Zalisia, which had been softened up by artillery fire, and reclaimed the area. This tactical success trashed all of the Russian army's grand advancement plans on the Holopole axis overnight. And this relentless storm was not limited only to the borders of Zalicia. Rydkodub, the neighboring settlement just northwest of this area, also became one of the targets of this planned coordinated attack network. Taking control of Rydkodub proved that Ukraine had now fully transitioned from a defensive to an offensive position in this sector. The Russian army had become unable to provide enough ammunition and coordination even to defend its constantly retreating lines. Those famous minefields and concrete barriers they had spent months building with their own hands became completely meaningless against Ukraine's drone superiority, because in modern warfare, whoever dominates the sky also dictates the bloody battle on the ground, second by second. This massive tactical victory that paralyzed the Russian army on the Zalicia and Rydkodub line was actually the reflection of a much larger storm that triggered a chain reaction in the region, because the real fuse of the historic collapse on this axis had been lit just a few kilometers away, only a few days prior. When the dates showed between May 17th and 20th, 2026, all hell broke loose on the Mala-Tokmaska and Bohyria axis, one of the most critical nodes of the front. This region was home to the most important geographical elevations, protecting the Russians' descent corridor to the south. Forces attached to the 118th Mechanized Brigade, one of the most experienced units of the Ukrainian army, were on the scene once again. These units moved like a ghost in the dark of the night. Right across from them were the heavy armored elements of the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army, which had been waiting for this moment for months. But the Russians were struck one after another before they could even realize what they were up against, or where the attack was coming from. The sky was suddenly enveloped by hundreds of Ukrainian FPV drones, like a massive beehive. These drones had spent months mapping the Russian trenches, bunkers, and ammunition stockpiles inch by inch. In the very first second of the offensive, the radio and communication networks of the Russian troops were instantly paralyzed by Ukraine's advanced electronic warfare systems. Russian soldiers, completely cut off from the chain of command and not knowing what to do, plunged into total chaos in the trenches. Right after, Ukraine's highly precise Western-made artillery batteries opened fire. Each artillery shell blew up those critical Russian bunkers, which were being laser-marked from the air, second by second, with pinpoint accuracy, while the trenches turned into hell, and the very moment the artillery fire suddenly ceased. Ukraine's small, fast, and deadly mechanized infantry groups took the stage. These small tactical groups rapidly infiltrated through the narrow security corridors amidst the massive dragon's teeth and minefields. They were moving, not in massive battalions like before, but in agile squads protecting each other. The Russian 42nd Guards Motor Rifle Division and their affiliated 71st and 291st Regiment elements were forced to abandon their positions and flee in the face of this incredible speed. Following these events, that highly anticipated moment took place. The settlements of Mala-Tokmaska and Bohyria came completely under Ukrainian control as of May 20th, 2026, after those bloody days. This event was written into military history as one of the most brilliant operations that changed the course of the war, because this was not just the color of two small villages changing on the map. This tremendous success meant breaking the lock on one of the most critical northern gates leading to the strategic city of Tokmak. Forcing the doors of this region meant disrupting the rhythm of Russia's logistical heart in the south. Of course, this epic liberation story was not confined solely to the dusty steppes of Zaporizhia. Meticulously planned asymmetric operations were also carried out in the dark forests of the north towards Sumy and Kharkiv. Small but highly valuable settlements in terms of logistical routes along the border, like Veselivka, were reclaimed with rapid counteroffensives. Here, Ukraine's famous 3rd and 10th Air Assault Brigades delivered relentless blows to the weakest points of the Russian lines. In forested areas where heavy mechanized units could not enter, these light infantry forces gave the Russian garrisons no time to breathe. On the other hand, looking to the east of the map to Donetsk, the most ruthless region of the war, the situation was yet another nightmare for the Russians. During May, the Ukrainian army launched unexpected local counterattacks near Kostiantynivka and Drushkivka. While the Russians were dreaming of advancing with all their might toward Pokrovsk, they suddenly found themselves forced to defend the very positions they had dug in these regions. Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade, and especially the elite unmanned systems units operating in the rear, were active. Instead of clashing directly face-to-face with enemy soldiers on the front line, these elite units struck the logistical heart of the war from much deeper, the enemy's vital supply lines. Massive ammunition depots, fuel tankers, and railway networks were targeted day and night. Every Russian convoy carrying bullets to the soldiers became the target of a Ukrainian drone launched from miles away. Following this massive counter-offensive wave, highly strategic targets on the ground, such as military command posts, were also attacked alongside the liberation operations. One of these took place at the other end of the south, in the watery and swampy Kherson, located on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River that is on the Russian-occupied right bank. Oleshky was a massive and secret drone command center for the Russians. Russian reconnaissance drones launching from here were providing coordinates to artillery to continuously lay down harassing fire on the Ukrainian lines across the river. This place was virtually the seeing eye and hearing ear of the Russians in that region. However, on May 23, 2026, Ukraine's special unmanned aerial vehicle units were in the sky for cold revenge. A deadly swarm of Ukraine's next-generation FPV drones brought a total nightmare to this secret command center in Oleshky. As the drones approached the building, Russian operators were in the middle of refueling and gathering at the door for a shift change. The target building was shaken, suddenly turning into a massive fireball with the consecutive dives of the kamikaze drones. As a result of this perfectly timed and ruthless attack, 15 expert Russian drone operators inside the building were instantly neutralized. The incident was so severe that despite Moscow's strict censorship, even Russian propaganda channels could not hide this heavy loss. Mourning on their own channels, they were forced to report the terrifying hit rate of the Ukrainian drones. With a very clever move, Ukraine had blinded the enemy's eyes and ears, right in the heart of its own home. The combined result of all these flawless operations on different fronts, the patience and the spilled blood, was that massive 590 kilometers of liberated land, from the endless fields of the south to the coal-scented towns of the east, from the dense forests of the north to the swamps of Kherson. Every inch of land had been reclaimed by paying a heavy price. Now, let's step away slightly from the tactical noise of this war, pull the map back, and look at the big picture, because the loss of this 590-kilometer area created a cold shower effect in the deep corridors of Moscow, much greater than an ordinary defeat. We're talking about a geopolitical nightmare slowly turning into reality for Russian staff officers. About the footsteps of a colossal collapse, Ukraine's persistent advance, particularly on the Zaporizhzhia axis, puts unparalleled pressure on Russia's most vital jugular vein in the region. The Tokmak and Melitopol route is the sole main logistical artery that keeps Russia's southern front alive and feeds its armies. If this artery is completely severed by Ukraine or kept under constant fire, that famous land bridge to Crimea could be entirely paralyzed. Ukrainian artillery units and rocket systems are now in a position much closer to these strategic highways, namely the M14 and T-0509 logistical lines, than they were yesterday. Every reclaimed kilometer means that Ukraine's HIMARS and artillery range is slowly bringing these vital transportation networks into its coverage area. This mathematical reality means a danger of logistical isolation, a sort of state of siege for the more than 40,000 Russian soldiers stationed in Crimea, the shadow of a massive army that will be trapped on the peninsula without ammunition, fuel, rations, and most importantly, an escape route has begun to appear on the horizon. So, in such an environment, the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army defending the region is currently facing one of the toughest and most exhausting tests it has experienced throughout its history. Every position they lose in Zaporizhzhia forces them to suffer more casualties for the defense of Tokmak. Therefore, the Russians are forced to hurriedly shift rookie soldiers from other regions to compensate for these heavy losses on the front line. Well, at this stage of the war, while everywhere is burning, where will the Kremlin pull new soldiers from? If they withdraw forces from Donetsk or Luhansk, the major offensives in the east, which Putin cares about the most, will completely halt and become pinned down. If they bring reserve unit from the direction of Kherson or from Crimea, this time they will pave the way for Ukraine to cross the Dnipro River and establish much larger bridgeheads. In other words, Russian military staff are currently stuck in a literal strategic dead end, a dark labyrinth. The picture is quite clear. The Ukrainian army flawlessly arranged all the pieces on the chessboard in a way that restricts its opponent's range of motion. As Zelensky clearly stated to the whole world, the positions on the front are now much more mature and rational compared to previous years. This tremendous momentum achieved could turn into a steel vice that pushes Russia step by step to the table of diplomacy and ultimately to making embarrassing concessions. Because while the Russian economy is crushed under the burden of the war. These critical lands lost on the ground also push internal political pressure to its peak, and Ukraine's potential moves in the upcoming period look like they will continue to cost Putin his sleep. It is obvious that we will see a much fiercer, much more devastating pressure in the coming summer months, especially in the Huliaipol and Orikhiv sector. Those new breaches opened from Zalisia and Ridko Dub will be the key to deeper infiltration operations for the Ukrainian mechanized units. Ukraine's unmanned systems, which are becoming deadlier day by day, will likely continue to strike fear into the deepest parts of the enemy front, because the rules of war have completely changed over the last 2 years, and Ukraine is practically rewriting the book of these new rules with its blood. The massive, clumsy, and blind armored stockpiles of the past have been replaced by speed, intelligence, technological superiority, and an unshakable motivation for homeland defense. Everywhere from the plains of Donetsk to the swamps of Kherson, Russian soldiers are hiding in their trenches in fear of that faint hum coming from the sky. It has been proven once again to the whole world that an army with its logistics lines shattered and command centers blown up cannot win a war with mere numerical superiority. In conclusion, during these active days of May 2026, we are witnessing a war of massive military genius and willpower on the ground. Russia's arrogance has crashed into a very hard wall in the face of Ukraine's technological and tactical intelligence. This 590 kilometers of reclaimed homeland territory announced by Zelensky is not just an end. On the contrary, it is merely a small harbinger of the greater storms to come. Time is running out like an hourglass for the occupying forces, and those massive military options in their hands are rapidly depleting. The Ukrainian army has proven once again that it is sworn to cleanse its own territory, step by step, village by village, trench by trench, and that patience and intellect will always triumph over brute force. Now, as always, it is your turn to speak. Do you think this tremendous strategic momentum captured by the Ukrainian army will be enough to completely sever the Crimea land bridge and drown the Russian army in the south during the approaching hot summer months? Or will Putin, despite all this tactical and logistical collapse, push his last strategic reserves onto the field and drag this war into a new stalemate that will last for years? We are waiting for your comments. Thank you for choosing us, and thank you for watching.